Excellencies, distinguished delegates and experts, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, depending on where you're connecting from the world. I'm honored and pleased to welcome you at the first edition of UNIDO's Multilateral Industrial Policy Forum. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you here at UNIDO headquarters today and to all speakers and participants joining us online. My name is Cristiano Pasini. I'm the Director of the Division of Capacity Development, Industrial Policy Advice and Statistics at UNIDO, and I will be moderating the first segment today. The Multilateral Industrial Policy Forum is intended to provide a space for member states to support each other and engage with academics and experts. The ultimate goal is to share knowledge, learn multilaterally, and build a network and partnership that can contribute to achieve sustainable industrial development. Participants will engage in discussion around topic of the growing need to decarbonize economy, the digitalization and automation of industrial production, the rebalancing of the global production system, and the role industrial policies and strategy will play in promoting structural transformation, productivity growth, and the attainment of the SDGs. Today, after the opening session, we will have a great pleasure of hearing statements from member states and the keynote address from Professor Sachs, and this will be followed by an expert panel that will discuss the future of industrial policies and strategies. Without further ado, I'm now pleased to pass the floor to the UNIDO Director General, Mr. Gerd Müller, and the President of the Industrial Development Board and Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to the United Nations Office in Vienna, His Excellency Mr. Alejandro Solano Ortiz, to provide the opening remarks for this forum. Director General, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, Ambassador. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, you are in person here. That's a great pleasure. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests and delegates, I'm very pleased to welcome you all to UNIDO's first Multilateral Industrial Policy Forum. We all see dramatic effects of the current global crisis. According to the World Bank calculations, 250 million jobs in developing countries were lost just from the effects of the COVID pandemic. So COVID is still not over. That are the consequences. The pandemic, climate change, and the consequences of the war in Ukraine hit the developing countries the hardest. And this despite the fact that they are not responsible for any of these crises. So what is needed? We just returned from the LDC conference in Qatar, and that is my message to the industrialized countries, to the G7 and G20. We need a new deal of fair globalization, global solidarity with a renewed spirit of international partnership. Industrialized countries invest trillions. Here are some around as member of UNIDO. Industrialized countries invest trillions for stabilizing their economy. But now the promises of the G7 to develop 500 million people out of hunger and poverty must be fulfilled. The $100 billion pledged to finance climate measures are so obviously necessary and must be fulfilled now. The climate change loss and damage fund must be concretized for COP28. Indeed, the global community pledges must not only be on paper, but must be made concrete. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to welcome you all to UNIDO's first Multilateral Industrial Policy Forum. This forum brings together member states, policymakers, and industrial development stakeholders to find common solutions to the challenges the world is facing today. New approaches to old and new problems. We need strategic initiatives to mobilize technology, investments, infrastructure, and partnerships at different levels in support of all developing countries, especially the LDCs. Excellencies, the global development agenda is at a critical juncture. The dramatic crisis we are seeing, the consequences of the COVID pandemic, as I mentioned, the impact of climate change, exploding food and energy prices, one of the consequences of the war in Ukraine, they have turned back progress on the SDGs. But we also have the solutions. Developing and emerging countries urgently need investments in infrastructure, social services, and renewable sources of energy, in jobs. They need support in tackling biodiversity loss, persistent pollution, and climate change impacts. LDCs make up less than 1% of CO2 emissions, 1%. But they are most affected by the increasingly extreme climate disasters we see. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, but we do know what must be done. We do know what must be done. Industrial decarbonation is key. Decoupling growth from emissions, and that is possible. We do have the technology and the knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of current developments, several industrialized economies are re-evaluating their support, really. And at the same time, the G20, that's the reality, has reduced development funding and investment. They have reduced, not increased, and investment in productive sectors in developing countries. The gap is widening. So a lot of you, I just returned from the LDC 5 conference in Doha. There I called for a better deal for the developing world based on stronger global solidarity. Thus, we have been developing the UNIDO strategy for LDCs for the next decade, together with you, our member states. It is possible to end hunger worldwide. A world without hunger is possible. To address climate change and to create fair supply chains. If we all take responsibility and do not leave the burden on LDCs alone. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, UNIDO is ready to do its part as the platform to facilitate knowledge transfer, technology, investments, and partnership among member states, private sector, and other stakeholders. I'm glad you are all here to bring your ideas to this forum, and I look forward to the results. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Director General, for this excellent introduction to the Multilateral Industrial Policy Forum. We do hope that this forum can be a platform to strengthen dialogue and coordination among participants on different topics. And one of the words that will stay with me now is the gap is widening between developing and developed world. Dear Mr. Solano Ortiz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Fassini. Good afternoon, everybody. Distinguished Director General of UNIDO, Dr. Gamula, Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to deliver this statement in my capacity as chair of the 55th session of the Industrial Development Board. The primary objective of the Multilateral Industry Policy Forum taking place today and tomorrow here in Vienna is to provide a mutual learning platform for a policy dialogue on industrial policy matters. In line with UNIDO mandate to promote and accelerate inclusive and sustainable industrial development, emphasis of the forum is on the contribution of industrial policy to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically the Goal 9. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we are recovering from COVID-19 pandemic, industrial policy has returned to the top of government's agendas. Governments seek ways to mobilize industrial policies to achieve the intended development outcome in line with the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. The forum will enable learning from the pandemic from an industrial policy perspective. The COVID-19 pandemic ended any skepticism that was left regarding the importance of industrial policies. Resilient manufacturing sectors help countries to weather the crisis and are expected to contribute to the recovery and growth of national economies post-pandemic. This year, the forum will focus on industrial policies for digitalization of manufacturing and sustainable industrialization. As inclusive and sustainable industrial development is more relevant than ever, innovation, digitalization, and modern technologies represent a solution to many of the greater challenges of our times, such as climate change, rising hunger and poverty, and global energy and food insecurity. Policies for digital sustainable industrialization can help lift the world population out of poverty, create jobs and income, diversify economies, and drive innovation. Being a global platform that creates a space for mutual learning, information exchange, and knowledge sharing, the forum allows UNIDO's member states to spur debate over how industrial policies can best be leveraged to promote productivity and growth, strengthening resilience and environmental sustainability, and address societal challenges. The forum aims to fostering a stronger multilateral collaboration on industrial development and policy issues at the global level between policymakers and practitioners, development researchers, and business professionals. Excellencies, honorable guests, policies for inclusive and sustainable industrial development indisputably contribute to achieving not only social and environmental commitments, but also, and foremost, to the creation of shared prosperity that leaves no one behind, and encourage UNIDO to continue its support to member states to pursue a just transition towards the future we want. It's in this spirit of making a meaningful difference that I wish you a successful and rewarding multilateral industrial policy forum. I conclude my warmly welcome to you and wishing a very fruitful discussion today. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Solano Ortiz, for your encouraging words. We have now reached the end of the first segments, and I'm pleased to pass the floor to my co-moderators today, Ms. Selma Prodanovic, who will be continuing from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Passini, Director General, Mr. President, esteemed delegates, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Selma Prodanovic, and I'm truly honored to be here with you today. I am a passionate entrepreneur, founder of 1 Million Startup, which is a global SDG platform supporting SDG startups, and also the Vice President of the European Business Angel Network, representing 10,000 business angels investors across the continent and beyond. And it is great to be here to really make these connections between what is happening on that high level that we are discussing today, but also what we are doing on the ground at the end of the day. I must admit also I'm very excited to be here today because I was part of the General Conference, UNIDO General Conference, when this idea was born and supported by the member states. The interest to organize this forum and to see it happen is really exciting. So it was not just talking and interest, but it's really happening today, and it's a great honor to be here. We will start, as already mentioned, we will start with the statements by the member states, and it is my pleasure, and we can start if we have the first video, announcing Her Excellency Ms. Mercedes Marcó del Ponte, the Secretary of Strategic Affairs of Argentina.
Es evidente que la transición energética está reconfigurando brutalmente todos los procesos industriales y los procesos tecnológicos a nivel global. Y esta transición energética se presenta para nuestros países como una oportunidad para avanzar en procesos de desarrollo inclusivo. Pero también puede ser un riesgo. La mera inercia de de lo que es el funcionamiento del comercio internacional o de los flujos de inversión internacional no garantizan que ese sea el resultado. De hecho, la mera inercia o una participación pasiva de nuestros países en esa transición energética, sobre todo aquellos países que disponemos de recursos naturales necesarios para viabilizar esa transición energética, puede ocurrir que se transformen en una trampa de mayor reprimarización de nuestras economías. Justamente el desafío es participar en la transición energética no como meros abastecedores de materias primas, sino en todos los eslabones de mayor valor agregado en estos procesos. Desde Argentina somos conscientes del apuro que hay que plantearse en términos de políticas públicas para avanzar en ese sentido virtuoso, y por eso estamos trabajando en planes estratégicos de desarrollo de la economía del hidrógeno, de desarrollo de la economía del litio, para garantizar que nuestro aporte a la transición energética sea absolutamente consistente con el objetivo central de generar condiciones de industrialización, de desarrollo tecnológico y de empleo y de generación de empleo digno para los y las argentinos. Somos conscientes que esta transición energética únicamente puede ser una oportunidad para el desarrollo inclusivo de nuestros pueblos si hay política industrial y si hay política tecnológica. Y por eso es que valoramos desde Argentina enormemente el esfuerzo, la coherencia y la consistencia y continuidad que tiene un foro como este de política industrial de la UNUDI, que está permanentemente dando los debates relevantes para nuestros países que seguimos persiguiendo el desafío y el objetivo del desarrollo económico, social de nuestras naciones. Gracias.
We will now move to the next statement, where we have the Minister of Production, External Trade, Investments and Fisheries of Ecuador, His Excellency Mr. Julio José Prado. If we can run.
Our government will always seek to face the challenges related to the strengthening of our industries by promoting a sustainable and inclusive production process. This vision is linked to our current competitiveness strategy and contributes to industrial development by improving productivity, access to global markets, investment attraction, and the strengthening of our production value chains through clusters. Among the challenges we face, we can mention the lack of long-term vision in the formulation of public policies, the high cost of doing businesses, and the uncertainties created by unstable macroeconomic policies. In order to improve these conditions, a new development model is needed in Ecuador, one that contemplates the industrial development as a multi-level collaboration process, bottom-up and top-down, by promoting the leadership of the private sector, academia, with public coordination. This new framework needs to promote innovation processes through cluster initiatives, agile methodologies that move quickly from diagnosis to actions, and public policies that stimulate the new business ventures with applied innovation. The Multilateral Forum of Industrial Policy will allow us to have an exchange of knowledge, experiences, and cooperation that will foster the adoption of international best practices and generate strategic alliances to achieve the SDG goals. In this way, Ecuador is laying its foundations for competitiveness through organized efforts, thus consolidating a more productive, global, and innovative Ecuador. Thank you so much.
Enhancing the importance of innovation from Ecuador, and the next statement will be from His Excellency Mr. Youssef Al-Shamali, the Minister of Industry, Trade and Supply and Minister of Labor of Jordan.
Your Excellencies, good afternoon. Through the past 2 decades, the industrial sector have grown to constitute 25% of the GDP, 25% of the workforce, and 90% of the total Jordanian export, penetrating over 103 markets. The industrial sector in Jordan enjoys several competitive advantages related to the relatively high quality of production, the availability of raw material necessary for some industries, particularly phosphate, potash, Dead Sea, minor olive oil, etc., and the existing distinguished human resources. Jordan directed considerable efforts to developing the industrial sector as to increase its contribution to economic growth and sustainable development. These efforts have been mainly based on the implementation of a series of industrial policies developed in real penetrating with the private sector. Central to these policies is providing the needed support and incentives to different industrial to tackle the main challenges of industrial development in Jordan that include a high cost of production, mainly the energy. The Jordanian government has launched the 10-year economic modernization vision that concerns the designing of a new industrial policy that is based on the fourth industrial revolution and in enhancing emphasis on a high value added industries like engineering, food processing, pharmaceutical, chemicals, and textile, and introducing more attention to SMEs and the green industry. While a significant process was attained in different aspects, a better international cooperation, including improved flow of goods and support by the industrialized countries, is still needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And moving from Jordan, we are going to Peru. The Minister of Production of Peru, His Excellency Mr. Raúl Pérez Reyes Espejo.
En todo el mundo, la industria manufacturera es una actividad estratégica para el desarrollo de los países. En el Perú, su contribución al PBI, al empleo y a la recaudación tributaria y a su capacidad para generar encadenamientos productivos la convierte en una actividad económica clave. El desarrollo de la industria representa una oportunidad para el Perú, pues una matriz productiva más diversificada, con industrias intensivas en tecnología y conocimiento, permitiría que nuestro aparato productivo, actualmente centrado en la explotación de recursos naturales, sea menos vulnerable a shocks externos, como lo fue la pandemia de la COVID-19. Y además, generaría mayores oportunidades para que los ciudadanos accedan a empleos de mejor calidad y mejor remunerados. A pesar de la importancia de la industria nacional, la participación en el Producto Bruto Interno ha caído en cerca de 4 puntos porcentuales en los últimos 15 años, situación que genera la pérdida de empleos y debilitamiento de la estructura empresarial. A esta situación se debe sumar que la industria nacional se caracteriza por su poca productividad y por estar centrada en la producción de bienes con bajo contenido tecnológico, lo que limita su participación en el mercado global. En este contexto, en noviembre del 2022, el Ministerio de la Producción del Perú aprobó la Política Nacional de Desarrollo Industrial, una política industrial que toma en cuenta las tendencias globales con el objetivo de generar una industria nacional innovadora, inclusiva y sostenible, capaz de competir a nivel global y de generar oportunidades para los peruanos. Nuestra política fue el resultado de un proceso abierto y participativo que tuvo orientación de expertos internacionales y de ONUDI. Sin embargo, es necesario reconocer que en el proceso de implementación de la política se requiere establecer un diseño institucional y organizacional que permita que se logren los retos planteados. En este foro multilateral reconocemos que para que nuestro país se adapte a las áreas claves para el progreso industrial, es necesaria la cooperación entre países y el intercambio de experiencias para compartir conocimientos, recursos y mejores prácticas, de manera que se garantice que estos cambios se implementen de manera eficiente y justa.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We are now moving to the statement of Message Minister of the National Economy of the State of Palestine, His Excellency Khaled Osaili.
General Director UNIDO, honorable ministers, honorable guests. It's a great pleasure to convey our Palestinian people greetings as well as our eagerness to advance the distinguished multilateral relations and our pride and deep appreciation for United Nations honorable position in support of our people and our Palestinian cause in all international forums. I extend my appreciation and gratitude to UNIDO for holding this forum, which will address the most important issues and industry policies. And although our Palestinian people suffer from the policies and violations of Israeli occupation and their impact on the Palestinian economy. However, our efforts continue to achieve sustainable development in Palestine. On the occasion, I'm glad to express my gratitude to you for developing national clusters approach to support Ministry of National Economy in developing the industrial clusters in Hebron, Nablus, extending to Gaza. We are interested in our regional collaboration with you for achieving the SDGs, especially through our interaction in the MIPF, which will be a good mechanism to enable learning and knowledge sharing between members. On the other hand, we were grateful to sign recently the United Nations Strategic Development Cooperation Framework, which will be another mechanism to support Palestine in achieving sustainable development. Our continuous successes with UNIDO on the ground and the experiences we have benefited directly from contributed towards drafting the policy framework for industry in Palestine, which will mainly contribute to formulate the strategies for the various industrial sectors after approval by the Council of Ministers. Palestine is committed to be more engaged in the regional collaboration that will result in achieving our common economic interest and green economy. In conclusion, we wish this forum success and prosperity.
Thank you for your statement, Your Excellency. And now we will hear the statement by Ms. Xu Xiaolan, Vice Minister of the Ministry of Industry and Information of China.
女士们、先生们、朋友们，很高兴参加联合国工业发展组织首届多边产业政策论坛。当前，世界百年未有之大变局加速演进，新一轮科技革命和产业变革深入发展，新一代信息技术、新能源、新材料、生物医药等新兴产业快速崛起。与此同时，全球经济增长也面临着诸多风险和挑战。在这样的背景下，加强产业政策领域多边交流互动，深化国际合作与政策协调，对于推动各国产业转型升级、促进全球经济增长具有重要意义。中国政府制定实施了一系列积极有效的政策，有力促进了产业创新、绿色转型和中小微企业发展。中国将坚持扩大高水平对外开放，深化市场化改革，打造市场化、法治化、国际化营商环境，推动经济高质量发展。我们愿意与各国交流分享中国产业政策领域的实践与经验，坚持多边主义，开展互利合作，共同维护全球产业链、供应链稳定，努力实现更加包容、更加普惠、更有韧性的全球发展。谢谢大家。
That was the statement of Ms. Xiaolan. And we have now a statement from the Deputy State Secretary for Industrial Policy in the Ministry for National Economy of Hungary. Mr. Nagy, the stage is yours.
Dear Director General, dear distinguished guests, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum. And I very much appreciate all the efforts that UNIDO makes for the world to be a better place and for the industrial cooperation between the member countries. For the Hungarian industrial policy, the short-term and long-term actions are equally important. We have to react very quickly and very impressively to the COVID pandemic situation, and we also have to react to the warfare which is taking place in our neighborhood in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. So we have to be aware of the fact, we have to be aware of the interests of our companies to save them and to provide ground for them to be able to proceed further with their activities and to be able to develop their industrial activities. On the long-term issues, we have to provide ground for foreign and inside investments. We have to get rid of all the regulation burdens that burdens the industrial market, and we have to provide ground for a very high-level education to be able to make the future of the next generation. What we do is trying to reindustrialize our economy, our industrial structure. We have to go towards the green transition and the net zero industry in 10 or 20 years' time. And also we have to provide for the taking all out of digitalization, taking all the possibilities that can provide the ground for this modern technology development of our industry. Our second step, or the middle step between in reindustrialization, is providing ground for very high value-added industry, which means that we have critical key sectors like automotive sector, health industry, and food industry, which shall be at first digitalized and at second step made ready for the net zero industry in the future. We try to reindustrialize our country or our structure due to the cooperation of four key participants. The four participants are the private company sector, of course, and with special enhanced the SMEs, the academic sector with all the knowledge that they gained from the past experiences, the financing sector, which is very much critical to reach the goals set by the green transition and digital transition, and of course the fourth participant is the policy making sector, the governmental sector, who can provide a regulation background for all these activities. This multilateral forum is an excellent opportunity for the countries, for the member countries to cooperate and to exchange their views about their experiences and their best practices from the last decade or the last years. Hungary has always been an active country, active member country in the UNIDO, and we try to make our activity for the future better. We try to improve our connections with other countries. So I wish you very good, I wish you luck and very good cooperation for all the future projects, and we will stay there with the UNIDO for the next decades as far as I'm concerned. Thank you very much.
It was a direct live statement that was made, and we are now moving to Ms. Susana Pecoy Santoro, the National Director of Industries, Ministry of Energy, Industry and Mining of Uruguay.
Buenos días, es un honor para mí poder participar en representación de mi querido país Uruguay en este foro de ONUDI para contarles un poco cuál es la visión sobre el desarrollo y el foco de las políticas industriales a futuro. En primer lugar, queríamos compartirles que como decisores de política industrial, los temas de innovación y desarrollo sostenible son de especial importancia para nuestro ministerio a nivel transversal y en todas las áreas. Nuestra gestión pone el foco en innovación y desarrollo tecnológico no solo como medios de fomento del desarrollo económico y social del país, sino además como un puntal central a la hora de enfrentar los desafíos del cambio climático. El cambio de la matriz energética llevado adelante por el país en los últimos 20 años solo ha sido posible gracias a la innovación, y es también en base a la innovación que ese proceso va a profundizarse, con el impulso a nuevas tecnologías y aplicaciones como lo son el hidrógeno verde, la biotecnología en desarrollos como biocombustibles, la inteligencia artificial y el Internet de las Cosas, entre otras de las que venimos impulsando en nuestro ministerio y que nos están permitiendo transitar hacia la segunda transición energética. Esta dirección nacional dirige la política industrial uruguaya buscando promover el desarrollo de valor agregado en nuestro país. En este sentido, el vínculo entre la innovación y la economía circular se observa la clave para el desarrollo industrial sostenible, generando empleo, crecimiento económico, impulsando una industria más competitiva y resiliente sin comprometer al medio ambiente. Por lo tanto, hacia allí debería estar el foco en el desarrollo e implementación de políticas industriales. El Ministerio de Industria, Energía y Minería cuenta con una unidad ambiental encargada de guiar y colaborar con las decisiones ministeriales en el desarrollo e impulso de las políticas públicas sostenibles. En este momento está coordinando el diseño de la Estrategia Nacional de Economía Circular, que se constituirá como una de las piedras angulares para continuar con los esfuerzos hacia el desarrollo de una industria sostenible y competitiva. La Dirección Nacional de Industrias cuenta con herramientas normativas y fondos concursables y de ventanilla abierta que tienen como objetivo principal apoyar en innovación industrial y sostenibilidad a las MIPYMES industriales, y estas líneas van desde la primera perspectiva del fomento de la vinculación tecnológica hasta la promoción de la simbiosis industrial en el marco de la normativa de fomento al desarrollo de parques industriales, así como también busca contribuir en el fortalecimiento del vínculo entre sectores industriales tradicionales y no tradicionales, como el diseño y la conexión entre grandes empresas y MIPYMES. Este debería ser el foco de las políticas industriales del futuro, promover la unión entre academia e industria y el vínculo intra y extra sectores industriales, apostando por el crecimiento de las MIPYMES, que son el pilar de nuestro entramado industrial y la gran fuente de generación de empleo a nivel nacional. Muchas gracias.
I believe that we have heard very insightful statements and commitments of the member states, and I believe that everybody deserves another round of applause for being here with us. I have now the honor to call to the stage Mr. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the world-renowned economic professor, best-selling author, innovative educator, and global leader in sustainable development. He is the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, president of the UN Sustainable Development Solution Networks, SDG advocate for UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. But also he was Time's 100 Most Influential World Leader and holds 42 honorary doctorates. The stage is yours, Professor.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. What a great pleasure and honor to be offering a few remarks at this first Multilateral Industrial Policy Forum. First of many, I trust. This is so important and so timely, very much worthwhile, and I really congratulate UNIDO on its leadership. The world is changing very, very fast, and we really need a forum on sustainable industrial policy, exactly as this forum is. There are three fundamental shifts taking place in the world. They're distinct. They're all very disruptive and very difficult to handle. The first is simply the pace of technological change, especially the digital technological revolution, which comes in many, many forms: computation, big data, artificial intelligence, telecommunications, and so forth. And the pace of this change is, of course, one of the most revolutionary advances of technology in modern history. And it's breathtaking and extraordinarily disruptive. Every day we marvel at the next breakthrough, but also wonder what it means for us, for our societies, for jobs, for peace, for war, for everything else, whether it's artificial intelligence or 5G or neurotic chat boxes or whatever it is. It's a strange new world, and nobody is really equipped for this world yet. The second big challenge, of course, is the energy transformation, which by itself is fundamental. We have a world energy system built on fossil fuels. It has been built on fossil fuels since James Watt brought out his improved steam engine in 1776, and Daimler and Benz brought out the internal combustion engine in the 1880s. And since then, we have a fossil fuel-based world, which would all be fine were it not for the fact that carbon dioxide absorbs infrared radiation. And only that accident means that we can't continue with the fossil fuel-based world. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with coal or oil or gas except for the quantum mechanical effect of absorbing infrared radiation, which is enough to wreck the planet. So we have to decarbonize. It's not a moral judgment, it's a practical judgment. And the path of climate change is accelerating. We are now warming at more than 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade. This has probably doubled the rate of warming of the past 3 decades. By some estimates, we're nearly 0.4 degrees C per decade. We are shifting from a La Nina phase in the Pacific to what could well be an El Nino phase in the next 18 to 24 months, which would raise global temperatures by around 0.2 degrees C just from the interannual effect. So we could be close to the 1.5 degree threshold because we're already at 1.2 degrees. Within 2 or 3 years, we could breach 1.5 degrees within this decade. We will have calamities around the world no matter what we do. We should understand that. We're too late to head off dangerous anthropogenic interference in the climate system. What we're fighting to head off now is runaway climate change by hitting tipping points, whether it's the collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet, the melting of the permafrost, the slowing or stopping of the thermohaline circulation, the destruction of the rainforests. We're aiming to stop the tipping points now. So this is urgent. It's not a game. Most of our governments are not at all ready for the scale of the change or the pace of the change needed. And the third, most unhelpful fact is the geopolitical disruptions. The war in Ukraine and the tensions between the US and China are basically a reflection of the geotectonics of the last 40 years. That is the rise of China, which is, in my view, a wholly good thing, not only for China, but for the world, and the relative diminishing, therefore, of the North Atlantic, which ruled the world for 200 years and doesn't anymore. And that fact is changing the world. And it's leading to, I have to use polite language, anxieties in Washington and elsewhere. Anxieties that I think really need nice calming down, have a cup of coffee, chill out, meet with your Chinese colleagues, calm down, but instead are leading to risks of war because Washington is panicked, in my view, because it's losing its perch as number one. But the implications for our discussion are big because we're decoupling. Unilateral sanctions regimes have to break technologies, stop 5G coming out of Huawei or out of other. What's the world supposed to do with this when the two big giants are fighting this way? Nobody knows how to respond, how to be safe. So we have three huge challenges underway. And the Director General wisely, wonderfully called for fair globalization. There's no fairness in the world right now, let me assure you. None whatsoever. And the unfairness manifests itself in three big ways. And it's not only a moral issue, it's a practical issue of unfairness. First, the lopsidedness of technology, science, and R&D is unbelievable. There are only a few places in the world putting out the cutting edge science and technology. Basically, North America, Western Europe, and Northeast Asia. That's it. Everyone else is way, 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 way behind. 90% of the patent applications in the world come from 5 countries. Everyone else is a distant, way distant non-participant in this other than a consumer of whatever comes their way. So all the ministers we heard, none of those countries is at the cutting edge of any of the key technologies, not even close. So that's a first unfairness. What to do about it? It's a big question. Second unfairness is the rules of the game. Who writes the rules of the game? 3 or 4 countries. That's it. There is no rules-based system, by the way. There's the rules that I want to be the rules. So that's a second problem. Of the 193 UN member states, maybe 30 are players in setting rules, and the other 160 are the takers of whatever comes their way. And the third unfairness that's quite fundamental is finance. If you're rich, you get it. In fact, you also get bailed out. And if you are poor, you don't have it, and you get sent to the IMF, which is not fun, by the way, even though my students all work there, so they're nice people. But it's no fun to be sent to the IMF. It means 10 or 20 years, not quite of solitary confinement, but of confinement. So the world is not functioning for most of the world's societies right now. Now that brings us to the question of what to do about industrial policy. First, what is the content of industrial policy? And then second, how to really make it work for fair globalization. And that's why this discussion is so absolutely essential. I think that there are fundamental reasons why industrial policy is relevant, why nothing about the technology transformation or the energy transformation can, quote, be left to the market alone. Because intrinsically, there are so many market failures involved in both the R&D aspects and in the energy conversion aspects that these are intrinsically public-private challenges, that the private sector is vital but can never do this through market signals, which almost don't exist for much of what needs to be done. First, government is fundamental for the research and development, no question. It's all core science comes from the big patronage of government. And that's been true for 150 years, especially true for the last 75 years. So first is R&D. None of the ministers we heard from has the capacity to make real R&D. They have the capacity to make some adaptations of someone else's basic R&D, but R&D is intrinsically a government function, but a function of big governments, and right now of only a few parts of the world that are close to the technology frontier. The second intrinsic reason for government is indeed the old idea. It goes back 200, 40 years of infant industry protection. This is a real idea. It's needed for early stage transformation to electric vehicles or to photovoltaics or to other transformations. Private business can't do this by itself and never has. That's true from the transistor revolution to the internet. Everything was done by industrial policy. The United States had a very successful industrial policy linked to its military ever since World War II. And that's where the digital revolution emerged, from the Defense Department, not surprisingly. Almost everything we use in civilian technology emerged from the military budget. By the way, only because it's easy to get military budgets and hard to get civilian budgets. You could actually have a civilian R&D program, but we'd have all our congressmen jumping up and down saying, don't waste the taxpayers' money. But if it's for the military, then they vote everything. So this is mainly why it's in the military budget. Otherwise, you could have invented the transistor for civilian reasons or other, even the internet could have been a civilian invention, not a Defense Department invention. So that's a second argument. A third reason is network externalities. We're talking about physical infrastructure, especially now the fiber networks and the long-distance transmission of green energy, and we're going to need long-distance transmission of hydrogen, and so on. One thing, by the way, about these network externalities is that any solution to the challenges is not at the national level. It's at the regional level at a minimum. Europe could never decarbonize 27 countries one by one. No country can decarbonize on its own. Every country needs transboundary flows of green electrons, of hydrogen, and so on. That's why I really advise against blowing up international infrastructure, by the way. Very bad idea. Because we need all this international infrastructure. We can't go blowing up things just because we think they're inconvenient. And so we really need governments for infrastructure, because markets can never provide the network infrastructure. They're natural monopolies. And so we need government either regulating or actually financing, and we need it at a cross-border scale. And the fourth is finance. We see how the financial system works. It's right now unbelievably unequal. If you are a country that uses one of the 2 or 3 or 4 core currencies, you can borrow, you can get bailed out, you have liquidity. If you're anyone else on the planet, you're in deep trouble. Very deep trouble. This crisis is going to get worse that we're trapped in right now, except for friends of the Fed. So those who get the swap lines, that'll be okay. Everyone else on their way to the IMF. So this is really a serious problem, but it's another reason why government is needed. But what's also happening right now, as I said, is straight out militarization of technology and straight protectionism that is not designed to solve problems, it's designed to be geopolitical competition. The United States should not stop the export of high technology to China. That is a way to provoke a war. Period. The US Europe should not be a party to this US game. This is so straightforward. This is the playbook of containment, which was the Cold War strategy. The aim is to contain. That is not a legitimate aim of public policy. It is a provocation. So this is where we have to make sure that industrial policy doesn't spill over to war provocation. And we're getting close, actually. Every day now we have articles about the coming war in Asia, like the war in Ukraine. as if this is commonplace. Are we really out to blow up the world before we decarbonize? It's crazy. So, there are plenty of reasons for industrial policy, but plenty of very difficult challenges in this. Let me say a few words about UNIDO's unique role. UNIDO is vital for helping the 160 countries or 150 countries that can't manage this on their own. Impossible. And again, with all respect to these ministers battling this, they're in a game which is awfully tough. So UNIDO has a unique role, assignment, responsibility, and the potential of high-level partnerships with other critical multilateral institutions. I would name the International Telecommunications Union as an example. I would name IRENA, the International Energy Agency, and so forth. We need these multilateral bodies crucially to help create some ability for most of the world to gain a foothold in what is right now a great power game. Second, UNIDO can really help to make this technology and science partnerships that are essential. But the third point that I would emphasize is everybody needs a regional strategy. Don't try to play this game alone. If you're Myanmar, I'm looking to Representative, you need ASEAN at a minimum. At a minimum. The African Union doesn't stand a chance unless it's at the AU level, because there's no scale. You cannot do R&D from way back in the pack in a small country alone. You can't even produce the technologies. You can't produce batteries or photovoltaics on a small market basis. It's impossible. But regional cooperation can play, and in fact it will play, the vital role. So my advice to all countries is get along with your neighbors. Go invite them for a cup of coffee and a piece of cake. Don't say you're our neighbor, we disagree with where you put the fence, we don't talk to you. You're our neighbor, you're our only hope for actually handling this world. And don't let any great power say, no, you're on our side, your neighbor's on the other side. Because empires divide to conquer. Divide et impera. The US is happy when neighbors don't like each other. Don't fall for it. Cooperate with your neighbor. It's the best advice I can give. Trade with your neighbor, do research with your neighbor, chat with your neighbor, don't fight with your neighbor. I'd advise Ukraine the same way, Poland the same way. Frankly, I know these countries very well from years of experience. They shouldn't be fighting with Russia, they should be cooperating, period. So this is really crucial. It's the only hope, regional scale. And in South America, we saw many ministers from South America. You cannot do this in Uruguay, in Peru, in Bolivia alone. But South America, that's a scale. And with President Lula, that's a leader. So there's a possibility of a South American approach to this issue that would be extremely, extremely useful and powerful. And since these countries are the protectors of one of the most vital ecosystems of the world, the Amazon basin, that would be also extraordinarily important. Finally, let me just say a word about the role of the World Trade Organization. Because as you may have noticed, it's not heard of at all in any of this discussion. When the US passed the IRA, the weirdly named Inflation Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with inflation, nothing to do with its reduction, but had something to do with tax credits for green energy, which was useful. The idea that it might violate WTO because of domestic content standards wasn't even mentioned by anybody, because the United States makes its own rules. It doesn't have to abide by anyone else's rules. But our question is, do we want a world trade system or a free-for-all? When I went to school 50 years ago, I learned that a free-for-all is what contributed to the Great Depression. Every country set its own rules in 1930, 31, 32. It was one of the greatest disasters in history. So the idea that we needed a trading system with rules is a very important idea in my view. Big powers should not be able to just do what they want. There should be a rule-based system. We should have an appellate body that's actually filled at WTO, not captured by the US so that you can't have appeals. And WTO's rules are outdated also. They don't actually take into account what is needed for decarbonization or for AI or for 5G or for other cutting-edge technologies. So if we were doing things right, we would have an active negotiation at WTO for upgrading the rules. Not simply saying, oh, they're out of date. We'd say, we need rules. We don't want to act unilaterally. We need new, modernized rules. The rules should aim to encourage a race to the top. Who can get to the right technologies fastest? And that means industrial policy. But they should prevent the unilateralism of sanctions regimes, militarization of technologies, trying to beggar thy counterpart, thy rival, and so forth. And so that's where I think WTO can most come into this. And part of our discussion about multilateral industrial policy should be about multilateralism, because we need it to survive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sachs. Of course, I have like 1,001 question and comment. I could, go with that. We do have a panel discussion later on, and we will then, where Mr. Sachs is going, Professor Sachs will be with us, and after that we will have an opportunity for questions and answers. Just if there are any questions from the stage or comments, then if not, then we will move to the next part. I think, Mr. Sachs, you're going to be like we're going to the break and everybody's going to run after you right now. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed delegates, Your Excellencies, Mr. President, Mr. Director General, it's been a fantastic first part. We will now take a short break and then go into a panel discussion, a high-level panel discussion with Professor Sachs and member states, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions.